Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Your Two Best Friends podcast with your co-hosts, Annalise Lacasse and myself, Danielle Hanlon. Today, we're going to talk all about dating. You guys have loved our relationship episodes on marriage and friendship, and so we thought we would do one about dating, our experience, how we grew up as Christians in maybe a Christian culture dating. Some of you may have the same experiences, maybe a little bit different. And then maybe some advice or things we wished we knew when we were dating that hopefully will help some of you out there who are in that phase of your life. So let's get right into our topic today. Annalise, I'd love if you could start off by just sharing your experience growing up. How did you view dating as a Christian? And then I'll talk about mine.
Yeah. So I think as a Christian, I felt maybe a bit of pressure when it came to dating. Like I needed to know before I dated someone if I was going to marry the person, which is kind of funny because that is really the point of dating, to see if you're going to marry this person. But I really felt this pressure and like only wanted to date one person, only wanted one boyfriend, thought it'd be so cool if I only ever kissed one person and that person be my husband. And so that really was a lot of pressure then to know, do I like this person? What's their character like, before I even went on a first date. And so, yeah, I think I definitely felt pressure in that area. And then another thing about how I viewed dating, and maybe this has to do with being a Christian, it might just be how I am wired, is I really felt there was a call on my life to like full-time ministry. At that point, I felt like I was going to be a missionary when I was younger. And so because of that, I really felt like the person I was going to marry also needed to have a call on their life to full-time ministry, like within a church. And so I really only was looking at individuals who were pastors or who were maybe pursuing their degree as a pastor. And it's kind of funny, my husband has a similar experience in that he's an artist. And so he thought that meant he needed to find someone who was also an artist. And then the two of us meet, and we're not what we had kind of planned in our head as the career that our spouse would have. But for both of us, we started to realize, like, why do I need to marry someone who has my calling? I'm called to it. So, like, why don't I fulfill that space? And then my partner gets to fulfill a different space. And then we get to still participate and do those things with each other. My husband, as I said, is an artist. So I get to go to art shows with him. And then he supports me in my different endeavors and things like that. And so that is a way that I view dating. I think it's good to have expectations and want certain things in our spouses, but I think I was trying to fulfill certain things that I was supposed to fulfill in the person I was dating, in my future spouse. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
That definitely makes sense. I think you grow up and as a teen, you kind of have different ideas of who you're going to marry. And for us, what we talked about in our marriage episode, there were points in our life where we didn't even think we'd get married. But
Mm-hmm.
as a teen growing up in youth group, I think it felt like the goal. I don't think it was ever said that. That was not ever something that was like said from a pulpit or taught, but it was almost subliminal messaging that
Mm-hmm.
I felt that I experienced, or just the way I viewed what I was being taught about dating and relationships and marriage. And so then in college, it kind of made me feel against the idea. We talked about in our marriage episode feeling trapped and that we would be less independent and things like that. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what kind of led me into that phase of like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be trapped. I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do because I'll have to go along with whatever my husband wants to do in terms of our faith, my career, things like that. And so I think it kind of skewed the way that I view dating in general. I think I also, when I was younger, especially growing up in youth group, would only ever maybe picture myself with someone who was actively serving in a very visible way. So someone who wanted to be a youth pastor or was on the worship team or something like that. I was like, oh, those are the holier Christian boys. And so those are ones I have to go for, you know, when you're in kids' church and it's like all the boys that are carrying all the chairs under their arms in the pipeline to then the boys that are going to be youth pastors and later in life. And so I think I kind of pigeonholed myself into I want someone who's in active ministry, which then my husband was actually going to school to be a pastor and working as a young adults pastor when we met. And he's now not in ministry at all. And so you kind of just never know where your life is going to go. But I think I set myself up for really weird dating experiences with the ideas that I had, that it was like the goal was to get married, and then this is the pool of people that I really need to be looking at. They're definitely holier, love the Lord more, you know, the other guys who aren't stacking chairs, carrying the chairs, not on the worship team, that's not a good pool to figure out.
Hilarious. And you definitely see that in Christian school as well, because then it's really outlined for you. Like, well, who's pursuing their degree in ministry? You know, like who is a pastoral major? And then you're like, you get your sights on those individuals. But that's definitely a weird, interesting idea, because really that doesn't determine someone's spirituality. And as you were saying, both of our husbands currently are not in full-time ministry, but they love the Lord so much and are some of the most servant-hearted, generous, kind men. And so that is an interesting idea.
I remember Annalise and I were both intercultural studies majors, and so we focused on missions, and we'd all like laugh because there were no boys in the intercultural studies department. So we then had to set our sights maybe on pastoral studies, who was doing worship, who was doing other things, because we were like, we can convince them to go to the mission field with us.
It's true.
There's no pool of boys in our department.
Yeah. And there was one boy at our school who was interested in missions, and I think every girl in our major had a crush on him because of that.
It was like it's like you're on an island, stranded, and there's one option, and everyone's like, oh, it's a boy with an inkling for missions. He has to be my husband.
Right. I don't even think he's doing full-time missions now.
You know, life really comes at you fast.
Yeah, you never know.
You never know what'll happen, but that is hilarious. Annalise and I will probably do an episode on our experience at a Christian university.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
All the funny stories about that. But that was definitely one of the things I forgot. There was one guy that was interested, and every girl was like, God has told me to marry him. And he didn't marry anyone from our school. So.
He duked us out, for real.
His pool of dating was much larger than ours. So, Annalise, how was dating viewed in the Christian community in our personal experience? So, outside of how we view dating, in a broader perspective, how do we think the general population viewed dating from what we have experienced? Again, I want to frame it in that way. This is not like for sure everyone's experienced the same thing. This is what Annalise and I have seen and experienced.
Yeah. And I know we've talked a little bit about this maybe in some of our other episodes, specifically the sexual shame episode, but I do think that because of when we grew up, we did grow up in a time like right at the end of purity culture, or maybe even in the thick of it a bit. And so that definitely shaped the way that I think a lot of Christians viewed dating. And I feel like we sometimes will joke about the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye. But I ultimately, my idea of like, I only want to date one person. I only want to kiss one person. And I need to know before I even date them if I'm going to marry them. I do think that that thought has some roots in purity culture. And even in that book of taking dating so seriously. It is serious. Like, I do understand, like, you don't want to just like be dating around just to like have fun, blah, 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 hurting people's emotions, getting your own emotions hurt, maybe crossing boundaries. That's not what I am saying, but um there can be such pressure attached to needing to know um like the outcome of dating before you have even begun dating.
Hmm.
What have you seen, Danielle, as maybe how Christian community has viewed dating, maybe when you were younger, and you could even touch on like, do you think that's changed now?
Mm. It's I love what you said. Yeah, starting to talk about purity culture. Purity culture definitely, I think, influenced the way I view dating as well. I went through a true love wait ceremony in youth group, and a lot of conversation about dating was just don't have sex.
Hmm.
And there was so much focus on the sex aspect of dating and just not doing it that there was no focus on how to really date well
Hmm.
or to date in a healthy way, because I think the value of waiting till marriage is biblical and true and something that I think the Lord has designed for our life that can still be emphasized without trying to control people's behavior. If you're not familiar maybe with a definition of purity culture, what that is, purity culture is the term used for this evangelical movement that was trying to promote a biblical view of purity. So it was after the sexual revolution. That was also a time in the country where the number one cause of death for men was AIDS. And so there was a lot of conversation in the secular culture about sex. And so the evangelical culture was responding to that with purity culture. And so it was their way of saying, okay, we want to promote this biblical idea of chastity and purity, waiting till marriage, but it ended up discouraging dating and using like purity pledges and symbols, purity rings, things like that, in order to do more of a behavior management versus a heart posture. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Annalise and I definitely believe in the biblical view of sex in marriage,
Hmm.
but the way purity culture was harmful was promoting this idea that just not having sex was the most important thing you could do. So it skewed a lot of people's idea of one, even modesty, skewed a lot of people's idea of women. I think a lot of women have suffered in the church because of this idea in leadership or getting opportunities to serve because they couldn't be alone with a man, things like that. Or, what you wear, it's your fault if something happens, you're, bringing this on. Purity culture has also definitely harmed the way people view sex even as married couples, that if you wait, that you're just promised as much sex as you want during marriage, that God's going to bless your sex life. It's going to be super easy. It's going to just be super good. You're going to have a great marriage because you waited for sex. And so it's kind of it really did impact a lot of things in terms of relationships, but dating was especially so because it felt like we were encouraged to not date. That was also, from the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye. That's literally what it was promoting. But kind of instilling fear in like getting attached to someone in
Hmm.
in things that weren't biblically based. The Bible does not talk a lot about dating. That wasn't really a concept in the Bible. And so when we talk about dating or ideas of dating, it's like we have to draw on biblical values that God gives us of, being gentle with each other, being kind, being patient, not causing other people to stumble, by bringing sin into a relationship or trying to convince others to sin. Um so things like that I think dating was really harmed by.
Mhm.
It was talking about like sexual purity as a way to be good Christians and not as a way that we can serve Christ and pursue purity by a means of chastity. That was just another way we could preserve purity in our heart. You talked about this, Annalise, of like the fact that, you know, purity is so much more than just not having sex.
Mhm.
It's a heart posture. And so that's how I viewed it in the Christian community. Right now, I think there's almost a pendulum swing the other way, and feel free to comment on what you've seen as well.
Mhm.
This is at least my experience of like, we're coming out of the effects of purity culture, and a lot of people have realized how harmful it was, how much it's affected their dating life, married life, things like that, and almost a pendulum swinging the other way of, well, the biblical value of having not having sex before marriage must also be wrong, and kind of throwing that out with purity culture as a whole. And I've seen, yeah, a lot of rebellion in that, I think, in
Mhm.
some Christian circles, which is really sad, but it's also, you can understand, I think we both growing up in it have seen the difficulties and challenges in our own life. And so yeah, it's just a little bit different right now. I think there's, I don't know, it's a little bit lost, I think, kind
Yeah.
of in the in between.
I definitely agree and have seen that as well. And so while you were talking, I started looking up some statistics. And according to the Institute for Family Studies, 65% of evangelical Protestants are living in cohabitation. So living with their partners before they are married. And then, according to the Christian Post, 80% of evangelicals are having sex before marriage. So you I can totally see, in statistics back this up, that there has been a swing, and really it looks like Christians are not necessarily living different when it comes to differently when it comes to this area of their lives. And I remember you and I talking about this before, like, how is this, why is this the case? And I remember you saying that it seems like some believers are able to separate this part of themselves from themselves, if that makes sense. They view this as separate from their relationship with God. And later on, I we will talk about this a little bit, but I think it just goes back to the point that we are holistic beings. And so part of our being is that we are sexual beings, but we are also spiritual beings, we're physical beings, we're, right, all of these things. And so when we do something physically, it doesn't only affect our physical being, but it also affects our spiritual being. And so it's really kind of, it's sad that there is this separation between the two, that maybe some believers are viewing their physical being as separate from their spiritual being, and maybe don't realize that they are so closely connected, and that is in turn affecting their spiritual lives and their relationship with God ultimately.
I think it's exactly right. It's this idea that we have to hide sex from God,
Mm.
and that God's not also a part of that. And when we were talking about purity culture, again, it's like that is separate because God just doesn't want you to have sex. Like, he doesn't like it. He thinks it's gross and an abomination, and God's a prude and all the other things, when that's not true. It's like
Mm-hmm.
sex is so beautiful and powerful and can only be contained in that marital relationship, because that's how important and beautiful and holy it is. And so it is just an interesting conversation. And we do want to remind you that if that's part of your testimony or where you're at, that God offers so much forgiveness and grace. We
Mm-hmm.
just did an episode with Jenny Markham from the Head to Heart podcast talking about sexual shame and our experience with it and being free from that. So we'd encourage you to listen to that if that's something that you've been struggling with. That's not something we're trying to do in this episode, but
Yeah.
talking about how we've gotten to where we are thinking about dating And just now what we're seeing in a lot of people our age and a little bit younger is we don't care anymore. We're tired of this being pushed on us. We're tired of being told, our bodies are tempting men and the spaghetti straps are going to cause a man to lust after me. And so, I'm already being impure and it's my fault. And of course, like all these things that we heard during purity culture, those of us that grew up in it or churches that subliminally and actively addressed it, I think it is obviously a source of hurt and church hurt and some trauma. I think, though, that if we're going to date healthy and you're going to date healthy, that's a part of you that you will have to heal, because people weaponize all sorts of things in the Bible for their own uses of control and power. And purity culture started out like a lot of things with a really good vision and idea. They wanted to influence culture in a positive way. They wanted to bring people back to biblical values. And then it was exploited to maybe make women into like the reason that men are lusting and blame pornography addictions on them or things like that. Or lots of other things that purity culture did. But it's important that we don't throw out God's biblical values that have been around since way before purity culture, that were designed with us in mind. Sin, it's like reframing sin to be not a list of things that God says you can't do, but ways that we break the idea of shalom with God. So this perfect peace. God created humans, and so he knows how to live perfectly human, the best way for us to live, the way that, leads to human flourishing. And so sin is just the ways that that's broken in us, the ways that it separates us from God. So lots of things that the Christian community has, said about dating or been influenced by dating have been influenced by purity culture. And so a lot of you listening may have experienced that, or you may be coming up on the side of, this idea that sex doesn't matter. Everyone should do it. It's not a big deal. We allow it in culture. It's totally outdated to wait till marriage. That's not something we still do. And so you might be somewhere in between. You may have experienced both. But if you're here, we'll talk about that a little bit today and hopefully give you some encouragement to remind you of what the Lord says, why it's good. We both are married now, so we could talk about our dating experience on the other side and hopefully encourage you in this and not be another voice that's shaming you or making it more confusing to date or making you feel like you can't date as a Christian.
And on that note, I was thinking about how maybe in the past, the way that sex has been communicated on in church hasn't been the best, or in some ways it's just been avoided. And so I do think it is important to have these kinds of conversations to get people, yes, comfortable talking about sex, but then also to partner that with, as you were saying, biblical truth, that it is a biblical virtue to have sex within the confines of marriage. So yeah, we're not out here saying like anything and everything is okay. That's not what we are saying outside of marriage. And so yeah, I know we've talked about this before, and I feel like this is important when it comes to dating, that sex is really good at bonding you with someone. You feel very connected to that person that you are having sex with. And within a marriage, that's really good. You should be really bonded to the person that you are married to. And it also has a way of kind of covering up some of that person's annoyances, some of the things that your partner does that might frustrate you and get under your skin, but having that connection to them sexually can cover some of those things. And so in marriage, you don't want to constantly be annoyed with your partner. You don't want to constantly be seeing like the way that they chew their cereal or the way that they do these certain things. You want a little bit to have like rose colored glasses of like, oh, I just love him so much. But in dating, you don't want that. You want to be able to see that person so clearly, to be able to assess, am I going to be able to handle and deal with some of these things? And then also, you don't want to feel that close bonding with that person yet. It's not time for that. And that just blurries and makes it harder to make a clear decision about, do I actually want to marry this person? And so there is so much wisdom, both when it comes to the Bible, but we can see now, like backed by science, why God created some of those things. Like science can show how there is a bonding that takes place when people do have sex. And so we can see even more clearly why God had this by design, only within the confines of marriage.
Yeah, I think all of those things you said are so wonderful, Annalise. Thank you for adding that. Annalise and I both have worked and currently work in the anti-trafficking space. We've worked with victims of sexual and domestic violence. So the idea of healthy Christian sexuality is something that's really important to us. And so if you guys are listening to this and you want an episode on Christian girl sex ed or things like that, Annalise and I are more than happy to make that into one of our episodes or answer questions. You can always feel free to submit them on Instagram or social media or YouTube, because it's something that we're both really passionate about. We see the way that sexual sin can be weaponized and harmful, and we've seen the ways that, you know, trying to prevent that has even been harmful in the church. And so our passion is really to encourage people about why it's a beautiful gift that God gave us, and to allow people to find freedom in that in the biblical way. So Annalise and I, sorry, Peyton was doing something. Annalise and I are more than happy to go into other episodes if that's something you guys are interested in. We'll do an anonymous poll on Instagram on the day so that you don't have to sign your name if you're like, I have more questions and I'm not comfortable. But we'd love to do that for you if that's something that you are wanting. So Annalise, we talked about ways that maybe the Christian community views dating. And a lot of that is centered around sex, which I do believe is the way that we really talk about it. We focus heavily on sex prevention, and then figure it out on your own. But what are some other ways besides just focusing on sex and purity culture, maybe purity culture's influence, but other ways that maybe could be harmful to a Christian dating?
Yeah, and I think some of these we discussed in how we view dating growing up, but the concept of maybe needing to know before you go on a date with someone if you're going to marry them, and then because of that, it is really hard to go on like a casual date, just getting to know someone. Something that my husband and I often said while we were in the beginning stages of going on dates is, we're just hanging out. Like, we're just getting to know each other. And that really took off some of the pressure. And also, Alec and I would have conversations about, like, I don't know. I don't know that I want to marry you. And him saying that and me saying that, it took off this pressure, because I think I have been in before other relationships where the person seemed like 100% sold on me, like, you're it. And that freaked me out. And so being in a relationship where it could be more casual, it wasn't as much pressure of like, we're hanging out and getting to know each other. And if we continue to like each other, we're going to keep hanging out and getting to know each other. And then eventually, maybe we'll decide that we want to hang out with each other for the rest of our lives. And we decided that's what we wanted. And so I think, yeah, there can be, as I was saying, just like that pressure to know, but it can be really helpful to remove some of that pressure, and you're just getting to know someone, your friends. And as you were talking about, in the Bible, there is not the concept of dating. And so there were just like friends and acquaintances and your family's friends, and then you just got married. And so I'm not saying I'm trying to go back to like the biblical form of like the dating process, because it was just like your family would choose who you were going to marry. And so I'm not saying that, but I think in dating in general, we can get this idea that there's this like in between phase between being brothers and sisters in Christ and being married. And so then that gives me permission to like do certain things with this person, or that gives me I don't it just like changes things. And so just reminding myself like this is my friend. And so I want to respect my friend, and I don't want to cross boundaries with my friend, and I want to honor my friend, and that helped us both to remove some of that pressure. I'll say I still felt some of that, like constantly feeling this, do I need to know. I need to know, because if he's not right for me, then I just want to break it off.
Yeah.
And something that I would pray over myself was, or like a mantra I would say while I was dating, is this relationship is making me better. And if it stops making me better, then I'll end it. And so that gave me peace in knowing even if we break up, I'll be better because of this experience. I have learned to date better. Alec has helped me to grow in certain areas. He's shown me a different side of the Lord, and Alec connects to God in a different way than I do. And so that was just a little mantra of, okay, it's helping me to grow. It's helping me to be closer to the Lord. And if that stops, if I stop being closer to the Lord as a result of this relationship, then yeah, it's probably time to cut this off. And so maybe if you're listening to this and you are dating and you're feeling a little bit freaked out by it, just remind yourself of that. Like if it's helping you grow, ultimately it's okay if you guys break up, because you've grown closer to the Lord as a result.
Yeah, I think we view like breakups as just the worst thing that could possibly happen to you.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think breakups are definitely painful, but
Mm-hmm.
they're less painful than being with the wrong person and committing
Yeah.
to someone who, I don't think there is a wrong person. So when you're married, then you are committed to whoever
Yeah.
you're committed to.
That's your right person now.
That's your type. That's your right person. That is the one.
Yeah.
Whether or not we believe in the one, they're the one for you. But it is, uh, it isn't worse than being with someone that you don't feel like is someone you want to be with forever, hang out with forever. I remember when my husband and I were in the beginning of dating, we were dating for a couple months, and I was living overseas for 3 months during that summer. And when I got back, we were hanging out one summer night, and he was so stressed, and he was like, well, I'm like not 100% sure I want to marry you. And he was like, I'm like 99% sure, but I'm not 100% sure. And I was like, I'm not 100% sure I'm going to marry you. And he was like, oh, okay. And I was like, yeah, we're good. I was like, I was not sure that I was going to marry you. And it just kind of just took the pressure off, where it was like, we're just dating. We want to be respectful to one another, like you said. We don't want to just be playing with each other's emotions or just trying to have fun. And, there's no goal in mind. We're intentionally dating, but I don't think intentionally dating means you're like engaged when you're dating. It feels like you skip a step, like you're talking. And so that's
Yeah.
why we've introduced this talking phase, even in, I feel like, Christian culture, because you feel like dating is the commitment. But dating is not the commitment. Dating is a commitment to, be seeing one person, but not for the rest of your life, until you two decide to go separate ways. And then you're engaged, and then you're married, and you're committed until death do you part. And so I think we are trying to like add another stage, because we're making this dating thing more serious than it is. And I think it's because some of us just like certainty. Like it feels secure when you're like, someone's telling you I want to marry you, and you're like, I really want to marry them. But you don't need to rush into that before it's time, because it is a really big commitment. And so I don't think that we need to, be just constantly dating our whole life and try to be like, I'm gonna meet everyone and then I'll decide. but I think there's definitely a healthy amount of dating that you can do and probably should do. I don't think most people just meet their spouse the first person they go on a date with. It's definitely happened, but I don't think it's the first person they usually go on a date with. So I think some other things that are wrong or harmful are thinking there's the one. I don't believe in the idea that there's just the one, because then I don't think you would really have to make a commitment to them, because it would just be perfect. It would just be super easy. If you were just created to be with that person, then it would be great. But I think the beauty of marriage is it doesn't matter who you are. I've committed to you, and that's what this is. And so I don't know what side of Instagram I was on, but it was someone making a video of like, give God a secret password phrase so that when you meet the one, that's what they'll say. And that'll be like God telling you this is the one. I don't know if that's a commonly held thing. If that's you, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe that's gonna work for you. Maybe for some reason that was a very common phrase or something. I don't know, but I don't think that you are just gonna stumble upon the one. I think you can marry a whole multitude of people, and that's a good thing because it means you're not missing out. If you break up with someone and it's like, what if they were the one?
Right.
It's not true, because there can be someone else down the road that God could bring into your life that you meet that you can also be happy with and have a beautiful marriage. So you're not like throwing in the towel if maybe you're not ready to get married and you break up with someone, or maybe you mess up or they mess up and it's like, oh no, the rest of my life is shot because my spouse has left me. Yeah, I think that's something you can free yourself from. This is the end of part 1 of the episode on purity culture and our experiences dating, and what our advice is going to be to you who are looking to date or are currently dating. This is going to have a part 2 posted next Monday on the Your Two Best Friends podcast, so look out for that. And we're so thankful you joined us for another episode. We'll see you next week for part 2.